Looking great. Good to go.
All right, well, let me pause and say thank you. It's always great to be here. I can't tell you how much I appreciate being a guest of Seven Signal and being able to participate. You guys are wonderful people, fantastic solution, and just nice to be here every time. So thank you.
Thank you.
And as we dig in, as Heather said, our topic is from legacy Wi-Fi to cloud managed. As always, you're going to hear my opinion, my perspective. I don't claim to speak for anybody other than myself. Um, and I know a lot of people watching have already gone down the path for cloud managed to some degree, and hopefully even for those who have been there, done it, doing it. Hopefully you find value in comparing notes, and then everybody else who's contemplating. This is more for you, but at the same time, it's good to be in the company of others doing the same thing. So hopefully we all find some value and something to talk about at the end of it if there's time. So about me, I am the whole package. The Duluth News Tribune has never said it, but I hope they do someday. That's my goal. It gets me a lot of movie roles, but it's also a burden. But that's a different webinar. So today we are talking again legacy Wi-Fi to cloud managed. I've long ago in my early days realized that this saying is right, and it's just profoundly all around us every day. The only constant in life is change. Whether you're talking about things going on in your personal life or in the technology realm, everything changes. Some things change faster than others, but boy, everything changes. And if you've been in networking long enough, I mean, just think about Ethernet. When I got into it, it was hubs and 10 meg and Catalyst 1900s, and nowadays 40 gig is commonplace. Wireless started off even pre 802.11. There was wireless connectivity, and now we're up to talking about Wi-Fi 7. Everything changes. It just is what it is. And under that umbrella heading, we're talking about the changing of architecture from legacy ways of doing Wi-Fi to cloud managed. And I'll throw some definitions of what I mean by both legacy and cloud as we roll along here. I do want to point out, specific vendors are going to be mentioned. That is really just for historical context and to make examples. I mean, no slight to any other vendor, nor am I endorsing anybody. I don't have blind loyalty to any one vendor, and I don't have I don't have bad feelings about any vendor. They've all got their place and their strengths and their weaknesses. But anything you hear in this presentation, any vendor that's mentioned, again, it is for example purposes. And there are a couple of historical points that are important. So, if you work for a vendor that's not mentioned, or you use a vendor not mentioned, please don't take it personally that I'm, leaving them out, and I mean a slight, because that is not the case. So let's get in the Wayback Machine and go reeling in the years, as Steely Dan said. Back in '97, real Wi-Fi, 802.11 type Wi-Fi showed up. 2 years later, Cisco bought Aeronet, and what a ride it's been for Cisco. And that the reason I point that one out is it kind of legitimized this whole notion of wireless in networking by a major network vendor. It was a pretty big milestone if you think about it. Off to the side in the consumer world, the venerable Linksys router that we all had, or some slight variation of it. I've still got maybe 3 of them. That thing came to market, just really, really neat device. 2003, MIT RoofNet started. If you're not familiar with RoofNet, the folks that started that, some of them actually went off and started Meraki. It's a really neat bit of history. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend looking it up, and pretty cool. 2005, Cisco acquired Airspace. What's significant about that, and this is not an homage to Cisco, but what's significant about that is, again, the market leading vendor bought a thin, uh, you know, as opposed to the autonomous fat APs, they bought a thin wireless company, and a lot of significance behind that. A year later, Aerohive was founded. Meraki was founded, both of them in 2006 or thereabouts, depending on what release you look at. Um, that's where cloud started. These two are that's where commercial, well-known, mainstream cloud started. Both of these companies are kind of pioneers in the whole cloud thing. 6 years later, again, some validation. Cisco bought Meraki. That said an awful lot about the viability and the legitimacy of cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. 4 years later, a company called Mist was started. The thing about Mist is they kind of proved that even though the market was arguably saturated, and that's my own opinion, there's a lot of players out there vying for market share. Mist was a brand new company in the middle of all that. And not only did they bring a cloud only approach, but they also introduced the heavy bent on AI. I have my own opinions about that. Some favorable, some but at the same time, they came into the market and they have absolutely helped to shape things and help drive cloud forward. And then a few years later, the other company, Aerohive, that got it all going, they were bought by Extreme. And then Juniper acquired Mist. So if you think about it all just in the cloud context, going from non-cloud to cloud being mainstream, this is kind of a little bit about how I see, one good representation of history getting us there. Along the way, oh yeah, there was absolute skeptics, and I won't say that I wasn't a skeptic once upon a time. The cloud's BS. What happens if the internet goes down? People who thought this up got to be idiots. And maybe it works, but it's just so weird. I don't want anything to do with it. Those companies that do it are weird. Just it's not normal. If you've been around long enough, you absolutely can relate to these sentiments being passed around. Especially if you've ever gone to or participated in or watched the tech field day events. I mean, this is the evolution of not only cloud, but also people's reaction to cloud managed Wi-Fi. That middle bullet, the controller and the sweet LWAP tunnels, CAPWAP tunnels, I will absolutely raise my hand that I was, and to a certain degree still am in that line. One of the things that lightweight stuff did for us was the ability to tunnel VLAN straight to the AP using a single VLAN. The CAPWAP, LWAP tunnel concept is just so empowering to network design. So that one still sticks with me. The fact that people were aware of Meraki and Aerohive, but like I said, they're different. And things that are different, we just don't like them. And then, as I pointed out on the prior slide, Cisco bought Meraki. To me, that's pretty significant. The word legitimization comes to mind. People that were maybe a little hesitant, a little skeptical of the cloud. When Cisco bought Meraki, I think that opened a lot of eyes that, okay, this is for real. If Cisco's buying them, this very much is for real. So let me take a little bit of a pause and tell you what I mean by cloud managed in the context of this presentation. All right, so the AP is local. It's always local. The clients obviously are local. The data is local. But system management, the old proverbial management plane, the data plane is local. The management plane, as the vendors like to say, that goes out to the internet. So system management, monitoring, and reporting, that's all done out in cloud land. If you lose the internet, it all works, thankfully. But you can't make any changes. You can't do config changes. You obviously can't do monitoring, but the system itself works until the internet comes back. Excuse me. Now that might sound like, okay, that's terrible. But if you think about enterprise wireless, we very much live in an age of redundant internet connections, resiliency out the wazoo. It's an important point, what happens when you lose the internet. But if you're losing the internet, and you've got an enterprise network, you might need to consider the design of your enterprise network for what it's worth. So as opposed to the controller and the network management system on site, that's what I mean by legacy. That's our two concepts that we're kind of not really pitting against each other, but we're talking about side by side as we continue the discussion. I once upon a time faced this very dilemma. We manage everything in the private space, all of our controllers, all of our APs, all of our switches, everything is in 10 space. We can't get that to the internet if we cloud manage it. Yeah, well, guess what? NAT has been around forever and it works pretty well. And if you're not comfortable doing that, probably somebody can help you get there. And it's really not that big of a deal to convert your private IP space for management so that the new cloud APs or any other cloud managed things you have can actually get to the internet to be managed. It tends to be a one-way. The devices need to get out to the internet. The internet does not reach back in, so NAT is just fine. You don't need, complex firewall rules or anything, generally. And there's also the various bastion hosts and jump boxes and all. There's a bunch of different ways to get your private stuff to the internet. To me, NAT is sufficient and my main go-to, but it's certainly not the only way of doing it. But I will say again, before we leave the slide, if your hesitation is, private IP space and, that's a big moving of the cheese, I would offer that it's really not, and it's quite doable. So before we go any further, a little bit about me. And again, in the context of the discussion, legacy to cloud. So, I do networks of all sizes, very small to very big. I've got large legacy environments that are, in my charge to keep healthy. And way back when I designed them and implemented them. I also have many cloud managed, Ethernet networks and wireless networks. Then also doing the SD-WAN thing, different sizes, different parts of the world. In some of these, we use the same vendor for full stack. Cloud managed, some are a mix of vendors. I've been doing the cloud managed thing in the branch settings way before Cisco bought Meraki. I was a very, very, very early Meraki customer. And that's not to, again, praise Meraki. It's just to let you know that I've been in the cloud game for a long time, and that has shaped the opinions that you're going to hear today. Today, this day, in the year 2023, my personal preference, given everything that comes above that bottom bullet, I love not having to maintain controllers. I love not having to have an on-site management system that I am responsible, or anybody in my organization is responsible for managing. I have found that through the years, those components, the controllers themselves and the management system itself, have by far been the things that need the most troubleshooting, far more than anything to do with just simple client access. Usually it's playing code roulette, trying to find suitable code. Again, this is multiple vendors, trying to find suitable code for that controller, trying to recover the management system, the very important management system that just crapped out in the middle of the night in your virtual environment. And you spend weeks and weeks and weeks with the vendor trying to figure out what went wrong. And then you have to rebuild and start from scratch. I mean, to me, having all of that out of the picture when you go to cloud, it's huge. I cannot emphasize that enough. Again, personal opinion based on personal experience. So when you move from legacy Wi-Fi, and again, legacy Wi-Fi, I have defined as basically everything is on premise, right? You've got the controller, the APs, the network management system. It's all there locally. That's legacy. And then, cloud does away with the controller, especially. It does away with the management system. And they're managed and monitored out in the cloud. Just a reminder of the definitions when we talk about what's gained and what's lost. Obviously not a comprehensive list. Um, as I mentioned, no controllers to upgrade. I think I said how I feel about the debugging of controllers, so we won't dwell on that. Same thing with the NMS, the top two bugs. Just so it's like a huge weight lifted off when you get rid of them, at least for me. It's like, yay, whew, nice to not have to do that anymore, not to be in that line of work, being a vendor debugger guy. The CapWeb tunnels, we will talk about that a little bit more. Like I said, that is, to me, probably the single biggest enduring benefit of the whole lightweight, wireless era when that came about. The ability to do that wonderful management of your APs on a single access VLAN, no matter how many VLANs are in the tunnel going to those APs. To me, I think that is the like I say, the most enduring and significant benefit that came out of the lightweight wireless thing. I mention it because some cloud vendors actually have an answer. When they say, you want to go to cloud? Well, let's talk about my layer 2 Ethernet underpinnings. Do I have to change my environment? This is how we have CapWeb tunnels right now, LWeb tunnels, whatever the magic tunnel is. We tunnel to our APs. We manage our APs on a single VLAN. Can I still do that and still get all of the SSID specific VLANs to those APs? Some vendors have an answer to let you maintain that. Other vendors do not. And that can be limiting. The other part of that, the aside, the footnote to that is you can also ask yourself, well, maybe my layer 2 design is outdated and I really need to change it. Yeah, well, that's another discussion. And I'm guilty of some of that as well. But at the same time, the question stands. How does the cloud solution that you're contemplating fit in with your layer 2, and what's the impact on your layer 2? It can drive up the cost, the complexity, the migration time. The cloud vendors that recognize the significance of how we benefited from those old tunnels, I truly appreciate them. The cloud vendors that can't give you a satisfactory answer to how they let you keep the tunnel paradigm, I kind of say shame on them. It kind of falls under the heading of everything new isn't wonderful just because it's new. Some of the old stuff still has relevance, significance, importance, for what it's worth. The bolded bullet there, the fact that you can configure complete sites without even having the hardware, boy, that has been so empowering. I have designed networks in Europe on the West Coast, locally, complete configurations done on hardware sets I might not see for 5 or 6 weeks. And then just give a diagram to the people who are actually going to do the connections, connect this here, this here, this here, and it'll all just come to life. That's to me, one of the biggest things you get from the cloud, the ability to do all of the configuration stuff without having to have the equipment in front of you, without having to access the command line, without having to put in the serial cable, whatever. That's just been so empowering. So that's one of the big gains with cloud. Like it or not, cloud networking is in the era of very creative licensing. This is all the vendors, or the vast majority of the vendors, licensing the bejesus out of everything. And it very much does feel like you're renting what you own, or renting what you already bought. Now you own it, but to keep using it, you need to rent it in the form of a license. I'm starting to understand that the trade-off of not having the controller on site and not having to be the vendor's debug, little debug boy, I'm starting to understand that the cost of that trade-off is this unsavory licensing thing, but it's taking my dinosaur mind a long time to warm up to it. It's one of my biggest rants is, what licensing has become. And I'm sure that's very generational. I'm sure to younger networkers, it's like he complains about that all the time. It's not that big of a deal. And I know that probably some of my older counterparts get where I'm coming from. It is what it is. One of the other things I have found, the legacy systems, I'm going to skip over the rogues versus the neighbors for a minute. The legacy systems I have found are a heck of a lot better at reporting, easy reporting, not just reporting, but easy reporting. When you've got an Oracle database sitting in your VM somewhere and you've just got unlimited terabytes to store data, it's not very hard to go back, even a year sometimes, and mine deep data about user sessions and all kinds of details. It's all there locally. When you need to do that kind of fishing expedition in the cloud stuff, it may not be that easy. I have found that you either need to get with the vendor, you need to rely on syslog, something. You don't have this nice, clean, native, easy way of getting the same amount of data presented the same way and as quick as you do with the legacy system. So again, that's one of the trade-offs I have found. Now, when we talk about the notion of rogues versus neighbors, that is just a representative example of different vendors and different solutions and different generations of their solutions, how they approach the whole notion of rogues and a bunch of other security stuff. But I was a little bit shocked to go from one legacy system that allowed me to see, a rogue was any RF SSID in my area. My APs are picking up an SSID. I can drill into that SSID. If it has attached clients, I can go see what the MAC addresses of those attached clients are. And then I can compare those attached MAC addresses with if they have ever been on my system. And if they have been, I can identify them, go ask them to turn off what we consider to be a rogue. That has just been, to me, a part of operational life for 10, 12, 15 years. Suddenly in the new cloud systems, what used to be a rogue in legacy terms is now a neighbor. It's no longer a rogue. I can't get that information. I can't figure out who is actually offending within my space. So it's like, even though you're leaping forward with cloud, we're kind of losing a little bit with reporting and certain security features. Again, my opinion, my interpretation of things that are gained and lost. Something's minimized, something's emphasized, right? So when you get into the world of cloud, quick time check. When we get into the world of cloud, I have found, at least with the solutions that I either use or have tested, SNMP may still be optional for some things, but it almost becomes irrelevant because it's all being monitored. If the vendor has done it right, out in cloud land, everything is being monitored. You may not get every little bit of information that traditional use of SNMP on old switches and old APs, et cetera, gives you. But at the same time, I have found that you really don't need it. There's other ways of getting the same information without having a giant SNMP environment. So to me, I found that you can greatly reduce or eliminate a lot of your SNMP use. As I mentioned, CLI, the command line, basically goes away. And a lot of people complain about that. That's one of the anecdotal strikes against cloud. Well, I can't get to the command line and see everything I want to see. I have found that almost everything I would want to see, I don't need to get to the command line for. It's either in the dashboard or it's in the API. Is that good enough to replace the CLI? Will that placate those who complain? Placated me. I'm pretty happy with it generally. Every now and then I get a little bit frustrated that a vendor didn't see fit to let me easily see CPU, doesn't easily let me see temperature, doesn't easily let me see memory, stuff like that. Some of the basics specific vendors kind of leave out, and they make you go do API, or they, have some other wacky thing you got to do to see what I would think should be in the dashboard for basically every product. But then again, I don't design UIs. It's easy to armchair quarterback and talk about, shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I try to remind myself, the people that, take on this challenge of designing UIs and all of that, I could not do what they're doing, and my hat's off to them, even when I'm complaining about the UI. So the API, back to topic, the API is absolutely stressed in pretty much everybody's system. If you complain to local SC, I can't get this thing out of the dashboard. Oh, well, let me send you our API guide, and this is how we pull it out of the API. I'm fine with that as long as it's a reasonable trade-off, as long as the dashboard is good, if not great. If I occasionally have to go to the API to get something, that's fine. If you give me a really crappy substandard dashboard and the answer to everything is use the API, for me, I'm not so happy with that. And whether you feel different or not is going to depend probably on how programmatic you are or your staff is. If you've got a lot of people who are really good at programming and Python and this, that, and the other thing, you're gonna, the frequent use of the API probably isn't that big of a deal. The only thing I can say is don't pay a Cadillac price for a dashboard if you're not getting a Cadillac dashboard. If everything requires the API, but you're still being charged not the wazoo for the dashboard that you find frustrating, there's something wrong there. And hopefully that makes sense. But anyhow, the trade-off to all of this is with the dashboard, I have found generally the cloud vendors do a pretty good job of giving you all of the common stuff, the things that you need every day. And then, the deeper stuff needs the API, or you need to actually get with the tech support to get that which you can't get out of the dashboard. I found it to be generally a pretty good trade-off. I think they've generally, the systems I've dealt with, have struck in a pretty good balance. Back to layer 2, I know I talked about the tunnel thing. This was actually an article I wrote for it was Tech Toolbox. Then Spiceworks bought Tech Toolbox, and I would not sign their very lopsided author agreement. So you'll see that it's posted by previous Toolbox user and not me. If you want to know more about the layer 2 thing as I describe it and as I see it, I've written about it a few times on my wired.blog, and it's also on Spiceworks. You can go see what I was complaining about, how cloud systems can leave you short on layer 2. And I don't like that I have missed in the title of this particular article, because this goes back to 2018. Since then, they have solved the layer 2 solution as I see it, for what it's worth. But this is an article that's still out there. And again, the vendors aren't that important. It's the concept to digest. So with cloud networking comes a lot of hype, terms that get bandied around a lot, AI. And I know somebody is saying, well, do they front load their AI? Private joke, but I said the words, so you can chuckle to yourselves. AI, everything is automated. SDN, software-defined networking, single pane of glass, which often equals a single glass of pain. I love that expression, and I will say it every chance I get. And everything is smart, right? So what about all that hype? Well, to me, it's just words. It's the same marketing foo-foo on a different day, coming from different logos. That doesn't mean I'm minimizing all of it. I'll say more of that in a minute. But a lot of it is just marketing. That doesn't change. It's always been that way, right? It still comes down to, who's developing the solutions, the vendors, what is their culture behind the products. Some companies absolutely package cheap hardware and they market it like it's gold. Um, Other vendor marketing campaigns, sometimes they are so heavy on AI and machine learning, you don't even know what they're selling. It's like, wait a minute, is this wireless? Is this networking? Is this routing? What am I buying other than the promise of AI? Right? These things to me are just absolute building blocks. How are they being used? How are they being integrated? It's all done by human beings, at least for now. Maybe that'll change in the future, in the near future, the way it's all going. Um, but human beings are flawed. And I've known some of the people who have done some of the AI, and I scratch my head about, okay, is this person even capable of doing something this significant? And maybe, I'm jaded and skeptical and all of that, but it's code at the end of it. And people do get it wrong on occasion. So um, every company has its own tolerance for shipping of bugs. It's always been that way. Some vendors will not put it out unless it's really, really been exercised at scale. Other companies will just put it out and, they will crowdsource their, you find the bugs and then we'll work together to stamp out those bugs. I don't think that's really changing based on my observations, just because we're going to the cloud. We're at a weird place where some companies are trying to squeeze every last drop out of their legacy local products and do some kind of weird integrations that make them somewhat cloudish, where other companies are just making a clean start, whether it's a new product set or it's a new company. This is all we do. We're cloud native. We're not, trying to squeeze out dollars out of our old junk and then eventually go to the cloud. There's a mix out there when we talk about what is cloud. You have to really kind of look deep and not assume that every vendor is approaching the concept of cloud the same way at this point. Sooner or later, all of the old stuff is going to have to go away. It's just the way it is, but we're not there yet. That final bullet to me is very important. When we talk about cloud or AI or whatever, the solution isn't guaranteed to be good or bad just because, right? Cloud and everything else, they're just buzzwords. It all depends on how it's implemented. Cloud inherently isn't great. AI inherently makes nothing better. It's all on the implementation and the track record, and the, company still has to prove itself. So the same skepticism that we've always had, or the same analysis of solutions that we've always exercised, that doesn't go away when we look at the new stuff. Just a few screenshots, getting to the end here, just to show you each one of these. There's going to be 3 of them. Each one is some kind of cloud dashboard. The only point here is you don't lose anything. These are really decent dashboards, a lot of information. The NMS is not on premise. It's not in my data center, right? I'm going out to the cloud to see these views, and they're pretty robust. Again, just not meant to impress. Just if you haven't seen, cloud dashboards, just letting you know that they are largely the same as what you would get from a decent on-premise NMS, for what it's worth. Just a quick aside, in the SNMB and the consumer and the prosumer space, there's actually a lot of cloud options. Tenaza is pretty fascinating. They're in Italy, and they are doing the flashing of old hardware and making them into a cloud managed solution. Really, really neat. I'm not following them as close as I used to, but I've got a few of their APs, and they're just fun. It's a really cool product to check out. Ubiquity, obviously, I'm guessing everybody's heard of Ubiquity. TP-Link has a solution set called Omada, and it is full stack. You can get anything you want under Omada and do the cloud management thing of it, and that's a consumer product. I'm sure they would say, no, we're SNMB, we're maybe kind of enterprise. To me, they're still consumer, but it's getting more impressive, and that's from TP-Link, who's always been associated with low cost. So that's kind of fascinating. And then OpenMesh used to be one of my favorites. They were bought by Datto. They're still out there. just not as approachable as they used to be, in my opinion, but it's still worth looking at if you're not in the enterprise space and you still want to do a little bit of cloud stuff. I'm just throwing those examples out there. As we get to the end, I'm going to tell you, I don't think any system is perfect, but my own cloud experiences have been far less buggy than my legacy experiences. I think I've beaten that pretty good. That leads into the next bullet. It is so nice to get back just to focusing on actual Wi-Fi and clients instead of code issues. That for me has been fairly eye-opening, how much time I used to have to spend debugging not client problems, but system problems that would impact clients. And there's a big difference in those two. Nice just to be able to get back to worrying about my clients in the actual RF environment. Upgrades, it's kind of the vendor's problem. You pick when you're going to do it, but the selection of the code, really that's on the vendor, and that happens out in the cloud at the time of your choosing. That has been just absolutely wonderful. Both on the management system, you have one less server or 5 less servers or whatever the architecture is for the NMS. You have none of that to worry about anymore. The vendor is upgrading that as well on the backside. That's huge. A good cloud vendor, I like that they let you participate in the suggestion programs. And then they also, the better ones, let you know where your suggestion stacks up against other suggestions. That's kind of nice. Just one more of those things where you're dealing with people that are cloud centric. Full stack from the same vendor is nice, but it's not required. It's okay to mix different products. The caveat is if it's all on the same dashboard, it's easier to see, but it absolutely is not required. I'll also tell you that it's okay to use vendor X at the mothership. It's okay to use vendor Y in the branches. Vendor Y might do something that's really, really sweet and easy to manage in remote branches, but it just isn't right for the main network. And to me, it's okay to use different solutions for the different situations. There's no more overhead to doing that if you choose well. And then, as we've seen, there's going to be feature differences between the legacy and the cloud. You have to define what's most important to you to know if going to the cloud is going to leave you hanging, leave you short in any way. And then in closing, I will say, even when you go legacy to cloud, some things don't change. It's still about reliable client access, right? That's what we're trying to do here. And so many times I think that gets lost in the feature set, in the marketing. I just want my clients to be happy. I want decent, high performing wireless. That's what I'm after. Don't wow me with AI and don't tell me all the automation I can do with scripting. That's good, but keep it down the list and just promise me that my users are going to be happy. That's what I'm buying, is good, reliable wireless. And like I say, it's sometimes overzealous marketing kind of acts like they're not even selling you that, but just my perception. Good design prevents a slew of problems. Got all kinds of dashboards that are out there meant to solve problems. And by the way, you must have problems because we got a dashboard we want you to buy. Well, guess what? If you're spending money on good design and you've got good staff that know what they're doing, good Wi-Fi professionals, you're not going to have a lot of the problems that the dashboards are created to and sold to find. It's kind of a weird, nuanced, not really a paradox, but there's something there that is to be considered. Yeah, the dashboard is nice, but hopefully I never need to use it because I designed my network well and good people put it in. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the last bullet can be polarizing. We're Wi-Fi professionals. Ever more, I'm finding that Wi-Fi is absolutely not the best wireless technology. There are way better technologies to do some things than trying to put everything down the Wi-Fi funnel. One example is the LoRaWAN stuff. Bluetooth has been with us forever. We got private 5G now. It's incumbent upon us to identify the right technology for the situation. And if you do that right, then a certain number of devices are not causing trouble on the wireless network as well. This slide is like, applicable to both legacy and cloud, regardless of your architecture. These bullets are kind of timeless, in my opinion. Whew, I'm tired. I'm going to go take a nap. You talk amongst yourselves.
Oh, you don't get off that easy. Sorry. Just a few questions for the Q&A. Make sure we try and get to everyone. So Anders is asking your opinion on putting radius service policy servers in the cloud.
I'm absolutely intrigued by it. And the reason I'm intrigued by it is, again, less systems to manage, and those systems can be quite buggy depending on the vendor, hyper complicated. Radius has become, it's not even just Radius anymore, it's NAC. And you're supposed to buy this huge suite of features you may not ever use because all you want is stinking Radius. So if it actually proves itself to perform well, and the security questions about protection of data and integrated with your backend like AD or whatever, if those can be answered to your satisfaction, and obviously cost comes into play, whatever. But yeah, I would not hesitate to explore cloud-based Radius.
Very good. All right, Nick. Nick Smith asks, any thoughts on escaping vendor lock-on and managing the transition from an environment with on-prem controllers and NMS to cloud-managed environment? How much pain can we look forward to with having to live with two wireless systems for a period of time?
I think that's going to come down to I don't think there's a single answer to that. It's going to be situation specific. Based on your size and complexity, but it's also going to be, dependent upon your staff. So if you've got people who are good at wireless, truly managing wireless networks, and they can separate themselves from the vendor. Am I a wireless guy or am I a Cisco wireless guy? And hopefully the nuance there comes through. And I'm not panning Cisco again, it's just an example. I fancy myself a wireless guy. I can work with anybody's vendor solution. Not everybody can. Might have to work a little bit harder to learn it because it's a different UI, etc. But it's still the same end application. So if your staff is open-minded and skilled enough to stay on focus for what you're actually trying to do, I have lived that it's really not that big of a deal. Other situations, I can understand why people are, all they've ever known is one environment, and, trepidation of going to another one and blinders and all of that. So it's going to be a very situational specific answer, and I wish I could do better, but I hope that helps.
Yeah. That's great. Let's take one more so we leave enough time for our dear friend Eric, who's in hiding. Let's see. What's your opinion about Meraki's Cloud RF Spectrum tool?
Meraki's Cloud RF Spectrum tool. So we're talking about like under Air Marshal and the per AP spectrum management. I'm guessing we're talking about any cloud solution. I have found the lack of real time, the fact that it's always going to be a few seconds behind reality can be frustrating, but at the same time, some spectrum analysis, as long as it's accurate and you know that there's a little bit of lag, is better than none. I don't think it's as good as real-time stuff, but it has helped me dozens and dozens and dozens of times to at least understand, think I understand. I could be fooling myself, what's going on in faraway locations from the RF perspective. So it's not, it's not the best because it's not real time, but at the same time, I found it to be helpful. I found it to be valuable, and if it wasn't there, I'd miss it.
Bye.